The scaffold groaned before it broke. That was the first thing she heard, a low complaint of wood against wood, the way an old chair sometimes speaks when someone stands upon it. Vivienne heard it and looked up because she had learned in her 24 years to pay attention to sounds that did not belong. The sky above the half-built stone wall was the color of weak tea, and the men on the scaffold were small, dark shapes against it, and one of those shapes was leaning back too far. She was standing in the lane that ran along the edge of the estate, a basket of pears on her hip and a shawl the color of moss pulled tight against the chill. She had come this way because it was shorter than the road, and because the road passed the vicar's cottage, and the vicar's wife had a way of stopping her to speak of matches Vivienne did not wish to make. So she had taken the lane. She had taken the lane, and now she was standing under a scaffold that was beginning to lean. The wood cried out again, louder this time. A plank at the top jumped an inch and settled wrong. The man at the top of the scaffold, the one leaning back, put out a hand to catch himself against a beam that was no longer where it had been a heartbeat before. His hand closed on air. His body followed his hand. Vivienne dropped the basket. The pears rolled into the grass, small green thuds she would remember later, though she did not notice them now. She stepped forward, not backward, which was the wrong thing to do, and the only thing she could do. The man was falling. He was falling toward the stones piled at the base of the scaffold, and the stones would kill him, and there was no one else close enough. She did not think about it. She would think about it later, lying awake with her heart still knocking against her ribs. Now she only moved. She threw her arms wide and up, the way one catches a child who has slipped from a chair, and the falling man came down against her chest and her shoulder and the whole length of her body, and the force of him drove her to her knees in the wet grass. He was heavier than she had guessed. Much heavier. She felt the breath leave her lungs in a hard little sound, felt his shoulder strike her collarbone, felt his elbow drag across her jaw. He smelled of sawdust and sweat and, faintly, of soap that was too fine for a workman. She noticed that last thing, and then forgot she had noticed it. They landed together in the grass, the man half across her lap, one of his arms flung over her knees, his face turned into the wool of her shawl. For a long moment neither of them moved. The scaffold above them shuddered and settled and did not fall further. A crow shouted somewhere in the elms. Somewhere a hammer had stopped. "Sir," she said. Her voice came out thin. She tried again. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man drew a breath that shook. He turned his head, and she saw a streak of blood along his temple where a splinter had caught him, and dark hair the color of wet bark, and eyes that were not the eyes of a laborer. She did not know how she knew this in the first instant of seeing them. She only knew. The eyes were gray, the color of a river under cloud, and they had the tired weight of a man who had been carrying too many things for too many years. "I hear you," he said. His voice was low. It was also not the voice of a workman. It was schooled. Every vowel had been taught. She stared at him. He stared back at her. The pears lay in the grass around them like green stones. His arm was still across her knees. His shoulder was still pressed against hers. The scaffold was still creaking, though more quietly now, the way a dog grumbles when it has been scolded and has decided to be still. "You are bleeding," she said. "Yes. Can you stand?" "I do not know yet." He tried. He got one foot under him and pushed, and his weight came off her, and for a moment she thought he would manage it, and then his knee gave and he came back down beside her in the grass, less gracefully this time, his palm flat in the wet earth. He made a small sound in the back of his throat that was almost a laugh. "I appear to be less capable than I hoped," he said. "Do not try again yet," she said. "Sit, breathe, there is no hurry." He looked at her sideways, as if she had said something surprising. Perhaps she had. Perhaps women in his life did not tell him to sit and breathe. She did not know his life. She only knew that he was hurt, and that a man who has fallen from a scaffold should not stand on his own strength before he has counted his bones. "Where are the others?" she said. She meant the men who had been up on the scaffold with him. She could hear voices now, coming closer. Boots in the lane. Someone shouting a name. The name was not one she knew. "They are coming," he said. His gray eyes had not left her face. "You saved my life." "I stood in the wrong place at the right time," she said. "It is not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing." She did not answer. She reached into the pocket of her apron and drew out the square of linen she carried there for the small cuts one collected in a day of walking country lanes, and she pressed it against his temple where the blood was running. He did not flinch. His skin was warm under her fingers. It smelled of rain and of wood smoke and of something underneath that she could not name. "Hold this," she said. He raised his hand and covered hers for a moment before she withdrew it, and then he was holding the linen against his own temple, and she was sitting back on her heels in the grass, and her heart was going very fast, and she did not know why. She did know why. She would not admit that she knew. The men came around the corner of the wall then, 3 of them, and one of them was an older man with a face gone the color of ash, and when he saw who was sitting in the grass, he made a sound that was not a word. He fell to one knee, not because his knee gave, because he chose to. "Your Grace," the older man said. Vivienne did not move. She was still on her heels in the wet grass. Her hand was still stretched out toward the man with the linen at his temple. She heard the words, "Your Grace," and she heard them again inside her own head, and she felt the world she thought she had been standing in slide, one careful inch to the left. The man in the grass beside her closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he was not looking at the older man. He was looking at her. "Not now, Pell," he said quietly. "In a moment. Not now." "Your Grace, are you—" "In a moment, Pell." The older man rose and stepped back and did not speak again, though his face said many things. The other 2 men had also stopped moving. One of them had removed his cap. The other was staring at Vivienne with an expression she could not read. She looked at the man beside her. The man with the sawdust on his sleeve and the fine soap under the sweat and the eyes the color of a river under cloud. She looked at the way the older man had gone to one knee for him. She looked at the linen against his temple, which was her linen, from her apron, which she had put there this morning without knowing that by evening it would be pressed against the head of a duke. "You are a duke," she said. It was not a question. "I am." "You were on a scaffold." "I was." "Why?" He almost smiled. His mouth did the thing that a mouth does before a smile, and then he stopped it. Because his temple hurt, or because he was a man who had learned not to smile at the wrong moment. "That," he said, "is a long answer for a woman kneeling in wet grass." "I am not going anywhere at present," she said. He looked at her again. Not the way men had looked at her at the assembly in the town hall last spring, which was a way that had made her feel like a shelf of goods being counted. This was a different kind of looking. It was quiet. It went on for a beat too long. She felt her cheeks warm, and she was furious with her cheeks. "You are not," he said. "But my men are, and the surgeon is a mile off, and I appear to owe you rather more than a long answer. You owe me nothing. That will be for me to decide." There was no arrogance in it. That was the strange thing. He said it the way a man notes the weather. She stood up. She did not know when she had decided to stand. Her knees were wet. Her shawl had grass in it. The pears were still scattered in the lane like an insult from a fruit seller. "Your Grace," she said, and she meant it as a farewell. "Your name." "Miss Vivienne Ashcombe." "Miss Ashcombe. Yes, I will call on you." "I do not think. I will call on you." he said again, in the same quiet way, and then Pell was beside him, and another man was on his other side, and they were lifting him with careful hands, and he was leaning between them and walking, badly, toward the low road, where a carriage waited that she had not noticed before. It was a very fine carriage. It was the kind of carriage she had seen only from a distance, on market days, going past the crossroads at a speed that said the person inside had no wish to see the village. She stood in the lane with grass on her skirt and pears at her feet and watched them help the Duke of Ravenholm. For she knew now that this must be him. Everyone knew the name, though few had seen the face. Into the carriage. The door closed. The horses turned. The carriage moved off. He did not lean out. He did not wave. He did not need to. She bent and gathered the pears. She put them back into the basket one by one without hurrying. Her hands were shaking. She pretended they were not. When the basket was full again, she lifted it and walked home, and she did not tell anyone what had happened, because she did not know what had happened, only that a man had fallen, and she had caught him, and he had said her name back to her as if he already knew it, which he had not, because she had only just given it. The cottage where Vivienne lived was small and warm. It stood at the end of the lane past the miller's, with a low door and a garden that in summer was thick with lavender and in autumn was thick with the last of the beans. She lived there with her aunt, a woman called Miss Petra Ashcombe, who had never married and who did not seem to regret it. Petra was in her 60th year and wore her hair in a plain knot and read novels she pretended not to read. When Vivienne came in with the pears, Petra looked up from her mending and said, "You are late." "I took the lane." "Which is shorter." "Yes, and you are still late." Vivienne set the basket down. She untied her shawl. She looked at her hands, which were still not steady, and she put them into the pockets of her apron so that Petra would not see. The kitchen smelled of the bread that was just out of the oven, and of the small fire in the grate, and of the beeswax Petra used on the table. It was the smell of the only home Vivienne had known since she was 10 years old, when her parents had died within a season of each other, and Petra had taken her in without a word of complaint. "There was an accident at the wall," Vivienne said. "At the new wall on the Ravenholm side. A man fell." Petra put down her mending. "Was he hurt?" "He was. Did he die?" "No." "Who was he?" Vivienne opened her mouth, and closed it, and opened it again, and said, "He was the Duke." Petra looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "Come and sit down." Vivienne sat. Petra poured tea into a cup that did not match its saucer because none of their cups matched their saucers, and put the cup in front of Vivienne and said nothing more until Vivienne had drunk half of it. The tea was hot and strong and tasted faintly of the honey Petra put in without asking. Vivienne felt her hands begin to steady around the cup. "Tell me," Petra said. Vivienne told her. She told her about the sound of the wood and the falling and the pears and the way the older man had gone to one knee. She told her about the eyes. She did not know why she mentioned the eyes, but she did. Petra listened without interrupting. When Vivienne stopped, Petra was quiet for a moment. "You caught a duke," Petra said. "I did not know he was a duke. That is not the point. What is the point?" Petra picked up her mending again. Her needle went in and out of the linen twice before she spoke. "The point," she said, "is that you did what you would have done for the miller's boy, or for the vicar, or for the tinker who comes in September. And that is why he will remember you." Vivienne did not answer. She looked at the tea in her cup. She thought about the Duke saying, "I will call on you," and she thought about how tired he had sounded, and she thought about the way his hand had covered hers for the space of one breath when she gave him the linen, and she felt something inside her chest that was not fear and was not joy, and was rather closer to a warning. "Aunt," she said. He said he would call." Petra did not look up. "Then he will call." "He should not. That is not for you to decide. Aunt Vivienne." They looked at each other across the small table. Petra's eyes were pale and calm. She had a way of settling arguments before they began. She did it now. "You will not throw yourself at him," Petra said. "You will not run from him either. You will be what you were on the road. That is all. That is easy to say." "Yes," Petra said. "It is very easy to say. It is a great deal harder to do. Drink your tea." Vivienne drank her tea. 2 mornings later, the carriage came down the lane. Vivienne heard it before she saw it. Nothing on that lane sounded like that carriage. She was in the garden, cutting the last of the marigolds for the kitchen, and her hands were full of small orange suns, and she looked up over the low wall and saw the black horses and the polished door with the crest that was too small to read at a distance, but that she did not need to read. She did not run inside. That was the thing she was most proud of. Later, she stayed where she was in the garden with the marigolds in her hands, and she watched the carriage stop at the gate, and she watched Pell, she remembered his name, climb down and open the door. The Duke came down more slowly than a well man would have. He used a stick. His temple had a fresh bandage under the brim of his hat, and his shoulder held itself a little stiffly. And he came up the short path with the careful walk of a man who knows exactly which of his bones is complaining today. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, and lifted his hat. "Your Grace, I am told I owe you an apology for the state of my clothes when we met. I do not recall the state of your clothes. That is a mercy." He looked at the marigolds in her hands. She looked at them too, as if she had forgotten they were there. She had, for a moment. "May I come in?" he said. "My aunt is inside. I would be very glad to meet your aunt." Petra met him at the door with the calm that she brought to all things. She curtsied. He bowed. She showed him into the parlor, which was small and clean and smelled of the lavender that hung in bunches from a beam. She poured him tea in the cup that had a chip on the rim, because that was the only cup she trusted with a guest, and the Duke of Ravenholm accepted the cup as though it were made of gold. He sat with them for an hour. He did not speak of the fall. He asked Petra about the garden. He asked Vivienne about the marigolds. He asked, at one point, whether the miller's flour had improved since the new stones, which was a question that suggested he had spoken with someone about the village recently and had listened. Petra noticed this. Vivienne noticed that Petra had noticed. Before he left, he set his cup down and looked at Vivienne over the rim of it in that quiet way he had, and he said, "Miss Ashcombe, I would like to explain, one day soon, why I was on that scaffold. It is not a story I owe the world. It is one I would like you to know. Your Grace does not owe me a story. I am aware. Then, I would still like to tell it." She could feel Petra not looking at her. It was a specific kind of not looking, the kind that fills a room. "Very well," Vivienne said. He rose. He bowed again. He walked back down the path more slowly than he had walked up it. The carriage took him away. The marigolds lay on the parlor table where Vivienne had set them down without remembering doing so. "Well," Petra said. "Do not." "I said nothing. You said well." "I did," Petra agreed. "That is not the same as saying anything." He did not come the next day. He did not come the day after. Vivienne told herself she was glad. She was not glad. She caught herself listening for the sound of the carriage on the lane, and each time she caught herself she was cross with herself, and each time she was cross with herself the crossness lasted a little less long. On the 4th day she was at the vicar's, whether she wished to be or not, because the vicar's wife had a way of arranging that could not be resisted without rudeness. There was a small gathering. Cakes on a plate, weak wine in glasses that were too warm from the sunlit window. 6 or 7 ladies, and the vicar's brother who had come down from London for a fortnight, and who kept looking at Vivienne in a way she disliked without being able to name why. The door opened. A servant announced a name. The name was Lady Marisette Vaughan. Vivienne had heard of Lady Marisette. Everyone had. She was the widow of a man who had left her a great house on the far side of the county and a great deal of money and no children, and she had been much talked about in the years since her mourning ended. Because she was said to be very beautiful and very rich and very close, some said, to the Duke of Ravenholm. The last part was the part everyone whispered about most. Lady Marisette came in as though the room had been arranged for her arrival. She wore a dress the color of the inside of a shell and a hat with a feather that curved just so. And she smiled at the vicar's wife and kissed the air near her cheek and turned, at last, and let her eyes come to rest on Vivienne. Everyone else in the room went quiet, in the small way rooms do when they know something is about to be said. "Ah," Lady Marisette said, "so this is the girl." Vivienne stood. She curtsied. "Ma'am, you caught the Duke, they tell me. I off a scaffold, my dear. Off a scaffold. Like a game of catch at a country fair." My. Lady Marisette's voice was as light as thistledown and as sharp as a pin. "I have known His Grace since we were both quite small, and I would not have thought, in all my imaginings, that his life would one day depend upon a girl in a moss-colored shawl." Someone in the room laughed. It was a small laugh. It stopped quickly, but it had happened. "I was fortunate to be there," Vivienne said. "Oh, fortunate is one word for it, dear. Fortunate is one word. Do sit. Do sit. You must not stand while I speak. You make me feel like a schoolmistress." Vivienne did not sit. She stayed standing beside her chair, with her hands folded in front of her, the way Petra had taught her when she was small. She kept her face still. It was not difficult. She had trained her face for many years. Lady Marisette tilted her head. "You know, my dear, one hears such things about a girl who has done such a service to a great man. One hears that she must be very clever, or very pretty, or, if she is neither, that she must be very well placed. I do so admire cleverness." Truly, she sipped her wine. Her eyes never left Vivienne. "Tell me, which are you?" The room did not breathe. Vivienne looked at her for a long moment. She did not answer at once. She had learned, from Petra, that a slow answer is often a better one than a fast one. She let the silence take up as much space as it wished. She saw the vicar's wife's hands tighten around her plate. She saw Lady Marisette's smile widen just a fraction, as if she had already won and was only waiting for the losing party to concede. "I am neither clever, nor pretty, nor well-placed," Vivienne said at last, in a voice so calm it surprised her. "I am only where I happen to be. If your ladyship would prefer a more interesting answer, I am afraid I have not one to offer." She curtsied, not deeply, just enough. "If you will forgive me," she said to the vicar's wife, "I promised my aunt I would be home before dark." She walked to the door. She did not look at Lady Marisette. She did not look at the vicar's brother. She did not look at any of the other ladies. She walked as one walks when one has decided, very quietly, that one will not weep until one is out of doors. The vicarage gate closed behind her with a small click. The lane was empty. The sun had gone down behind the elms while she was inside, and the air had that particular thin blue of an autumn evening, and her breath came out in little clouds against it. She walked. She did not weep. She had promised herself she would not weep until she was home, and she meant to keep the promise. She walked with her hands pressed flat against her sides so that they would not shake in a way anyone passing might see. She had gone perhaps a quarter of a mile when she heard the horse behind her. She did not turn. She thought at first it was a farmer or the miller's boy going home late, and she stepped nearer the hedgerow to let the rider pass. The horse did not pass. It slowed. It came alongside her at a walk. "Miss Ashcombe." She did turn then. She had known his voice by the second word. The Duke of Ravenholm was on a dark bay horse, alone, without his stick, without Pell, without the carriage. He was in a plain riding coat, and his hat was pulled low against the wind, and he was looking down at her with the same quiet look she remembered from the grass. Your Grace. I have been to the vicar's. I stopped my horse in the lane outside for perhaps 4 minutes. Long enough to hear a certain lady laugh through an open window. Long enough to see you leave, he paused. Long enough to decide not to go in. Vivienne did not know what to say, so she said nothing. That too she had learned from Petra. May I ride with you as far as your gate, he said. It was not quite a question. Your Grace, it is not proper, no, he said. It is not. Then, Miss Ashcombe, I have this evening had my patience with propriety somewhat used up. If you would prefer me to ride off, I will. Say the word. She looked up at him. His face in the blue light was not the face he had shown at her aunt's parlor table. It was closer to the face he had had in the grass. Tired, honest, a little angry, though not at her. You may ride, she said. He got down from the horse. He did not mount again. He walked beside her, leading the animal by the reins, and the horse's hooves made a soft double sound on the lane, and for a little while neither of them spoke. She could hear the horse's breath. She could hear her own. She could hear his boots. She was cruel to you, he said at last. I have heard worse. That is not the same as its being nothing. No, Vivienne said quietly. It is not. They walked a few more paces. I was on the scaffold, he said, without her asking, because a boy fell off it 3 weeks ago. He was 15. He broke both his legs. He is the son of a man who has served my house for 30 years. I promised him I would see the work done properly. I have been climbing that scaffold every 3rd day since to inspect the joins, because the master builder was the man who let the boy fall. I did not trust his word. I trusted only what I could see with my own eyes. Vivienne did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the lane. That is why you were dressed as a workman. It is. You did not tell anyone. No. Why? He was quiet a moment. Because a duke inspecting a scaffold makes a great deal of noise, he said. A man in an old coat makes none. I did not wish to embarrass the master builder in front of his men. I wished only to know if the wood was sound. And was it? No, he said. It was not. They walked a few more paces. He will be dismissed, the duke said. The master builder. Quietly, without shame. He will be given a small pension and a letter of character that speaks only of his best work. He has 3 daughters. I do not wish them to suffer for his failure. That is between him and me. Vivienne stopped walking. He stopped too. The horse stopped. He looked at her. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you asked me why I was on the scaffold. I asked you 2 mornings ago. You did not answer then. I did not know you well enough then. You do not know me well now. I know you enough. They stood in the lane. The blue had deepened into something almost black. A single star had come out over the elms. The horse shifted its weight and lowered its head to crop at a tuft of grass beside the ditch. Your Grace, she said. Lady Marisette said today, in front of 6 women, that I was neither clever, nor pretty, nor well-placed. I told her she was correct. You lied. I did not. Miss Ashcombe. I did not lie, Your Grace. I am not well-placed. I have no fortune. My father was a clergyman with a small living, and when he died there was very little. My aunt has cared for me from a kindness she has never once mentioned. That is what I am. That is what your friends will see when they look at me, and I will not pretend otherwise. I will not have them saying, one day, that I climbed by pretending I stood higher than I do. He did not answer at once. He was looking at her in the blue dark, and his face was hard to read. That is not the answer of a woman who is not clever, he said quietly. Your Grace, Miss Ashcombe, may I ask you something? Yes. Would you allow me to call again? She looked at him. She thought of Petra, she thought of Lady Marisette, she thought of the pears in the grass, and of the way his hand had covered hers for the space of one breath. "Yes," she said, "once more." "Once more," he agreed. He mounted his horse at her gate. He touched the brim of his hat. He rode off into the deeper blue, and the sound of the hooves grew small, and she stood at the gate with her hand on the latch and did not go in for a long moment. When she did go in, Petra was at the window. Petra did not say anything. She only put the kettle on. He came 4 times over the next fortnight. Not more. Never at hours when it would have been improper. Never alone in a room with her without Petra sewing in the chair by the window. Each time he stayed an hour. Each time he asked one small question about her life and did not ask a second until the first had been fully answered. He was learning her the way a man learns a landscape he intends to walk in for the rest of his life. She saw this. She did not name it to herself, but she saw it. Between the visits, she went about her days. She cut flowers. She helped Petra with the mending. She walked to the village for salt and thread. And each time she walked to the village, she felt eyes. The village was small. Word had traveled that the Duke of Ravenholm had called at the Ashcombe cottage was known before he had ridden off after his first visit. That he had called again was known before the second cup of tea had cooled. By the 3rd visit, the shopkeeper's daughter had begun to curtsy to Vivienne in the street, and Vivienne had asked her, very gently, to please stop, which had only made the girl curtsy more. Lady Marisette did not come again to the vicar's. She did not need to. She had other places to be seen, and other rooms to speak in, and by the end of the 2nd week Vivienne had heard from 3 different women, each of whom claimed to be sorry to tell her the things Lady Marisette had said in those rooms. That Miss Ashcombe was a country nobody, that she had thrown herself under a scaffold on purpose, that she was clever in the way certain women are clever, that the Duke, who was known to be a serious man, would come to his senses within a month. Vivienne did not answer any of it. She kept her mouth still. She kept her face still. At night she cried once, quietly into her pillow, and Petra pretended not to hear. And in the morning Vivienne washed her face and went out into the garden and cut more marigolds, because there were still marigolds, and the world had not stopped because a beautiful woman in a shell-colored dress wished it had. On the 3rd visit, the Duke told her a story about his mother, who had died when he was 9. On the 4th, he asked whether her aunt would allow him to send a physician to look at Petra's knee, which he had noticed pained her when she rose from her chair. Petra said she would allow no such thing. The Duke said he had thought as much and had brought a small jar of an ointment his own housekeeper made, which she was welcome to accept or throw at his head. Petra accepted the jar. When he was gone, she put it on the shelf without opening it and looked at it for a long time. "He is watching," Petra said. "Everything. Do you understand that?" "Yes," Vivienne said. "Does it frighten you?" "A little." Good. On the 5th visit, which was not counted in the Onsmore, because it was Petra who invited him this time, he did not come alone. He brought with him a small boy, perhaps 6 years old, thin, with dark hair and a scar along his jaw. The boy's name was Tomas. He was, the Duke explained, the son of one of the tenants on the estate, and he had lost his mother in the winter and had not spoken since. He was staying at the great house because his father was working in the north. The Duke had brought him because Tomas had heard, somehow, about a lady who had caught a falling man and had asked in writing on a slate to see her. Vivienne sat down on the low stool in the garden. She did not stand over the child. She did not speak first. She waited. Tomas stood at the edge of the flower bed and looked at the marigolds. After a long time he came closer. He did not speak. He held out his slate. On it he had written, in careful crooked letters, "Was he heavy?" Vivienne looked at the slate. She smiled. It was the first true smile she had smiled in a fortnight. "Yes," she said, "he was very heavy." Tomas rubbed the slate clean with his sleeve. He wrote again. "Did you drop the pears?" "I did." "Did they break?" "Some of them." Tomas nodded, as if this satisfied something in him. He looked up at the Duke, who was standing a little way off, pretending to inspect a shrub. Then he looked back at Vivienne. He wiped the slate. He wrote one more thing. "He is not sad when he is here." Vivienne read it. She did not answer. She did not trust her voice. She reached out her hand, and Tomas took it and stood beside her for a while, not speaking, watching the bees in the last of the lavender. The Duke did not look at them. The Duke was, she saw when she finally glanced at him, staring very hard at the shrub. That night, after they had gone, Petra said, "Did you know?" "Know what?" "About the boy." That he had not spoken. "No, he has not spoken in 8 months, they say. He wrote for you within an hour. I did nothing." "That," Petra said, "is precisely the point." Vivienne did not sleep well that night. She lay awake thinking of the child's careful crooked letters. "He is not sad when he is here." She thought about the Duke pretending to look at the shrub. She thought about the way, at the very end of the visit, when Tomas had climbed into the carriage first, the Duke had turned back on the path and looked at her, only for a moment, and had not said anything at all, and had needed to say nothing at all. Autumn deepened. The elms turned the color of old brass. The lane was thick with fallen leaves. Vivienne walked the lane most mornings because she had begun to find that walking early cleared her head, and her head these days needed clearing. It was on such a morning that she came around the bend by the low stone wall and found Lady Marisette Vaughan waiting for her. Lady Marisette was on foot, which surprised Vivienne so completely that she stopped in the lane. Lady Marisette did not walk. Everyone knew Lady Marisette did not walk, yet here she was, in a dark blue pelisse and boots that had never seen a country lane before this hour, standing under the elms with her hands folded in front of her like a woman who had prepared what she meant to say. "Miss Ashcombe." "My lady, I hoped I might find you here. Your aunt told me at what hour you walked. My aunt would not have. Your aunt told the maid at the vicarage, who told the vicar's wife, who told me. Do not be cross with your aunt. She has been perfectly loyal." Vivienne did not answer. "May I walk with you?" Lady Marisette said, "if it pleases you." They walked. Lady Marisette's boots made a small crisp sound on the leaves. Her breath came a little quick. She was not used to walking. Vivienne saw. She had come out here on purpose, and it had cost her something, and Vivienne, in spite of everything, felt a small, unwelcome pity. "I owe you an apology," Lady Marisette said. Vivienne stopped walking. So did Lady Marisette. They stood in the lane with the leaves around their feet and the elms above them and the smoke of a distant chimney rising thin against the sky. "I said a cruel thing to you," Lady Marisette said. "I said it in front of women who repeat what they hear. I said it because I was angry, and I said it because I was afraid, and neither is an excuse. I have said many things about you since. Those, too, I regret. Not all of them. Some of them I meant. But the cruel things, those I regret." Vivienne did not answer. "He came to me," Lady Marisette said. "The Duke. He came to me a week ago. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He said only one sentence to me. Would you like to know what he said?" "No, I will tell you anyway." He said, "If you speak of her again in any room where I might hear of it, I will simply cease to know you." That is all. That was the whole of it. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He said it, and then he asked whether I would like more tea. Lady Marisette laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was something closer to a small, dry sound of surprise, as if she were still catching up with herself. "I have known him since we were children. I do not remember him ever having said such a thing to anyone. I do not think he would say it twice." "I am sorry," Vivienne said, and she was not sure why she was sorry, only that she was. Do not be. Lady Marisette shook her head. It is a very old story, Miss Ashcombe. I loved him when we were 17. He did not love me. I have spent a great many years pretending that was not what happened. I am tired of pretending. My apology is real. My other feelings are none of your concern. She turned. She began to walk back the way she had come. Then she stopped. She looked over her shoulder. He is a serious man, Miss Ashcombe. Do you understand what that means? I think so. You do not quite. He does not change his mind. He does not fall out of a thing. If he has chosen you, he has chosen you the way one chooses a country to live in. Do not disappoint him, and more than that, do not let anyone frighten you into disappointing yourself. That is my last cruelty to you. Take it as advice. She walked away. Her boots made their small, crisp sound. In a moment, she was around the bend. Vivienne stood in the lane a long time before she went home. The engagement was announced 3 weeks later. Not in the papers first in the small drawing room of the vicar's cottage at a gathering that had been arranged, at Petra's careful request, on a Thursday afternoon in late November. It was the same room in which Lady Marisette had once laughed a small laugh at Vivienne's expense. The same 6 women were present. The same weak wine was in the same warm glasses. The vicar's brother had, mercifully, gone back to London. Vivienne stood in her plain gray dress and her mother's small pearl earrings, and Petra stood beside her in her Sunday cap, and the Duke of Ravenholm came in with Pell behind him carrying his hat, and the room went silent in a way that a room only goes silent when it knows something it does not yet know. He crossed the room to Vivienne. He did not look at anyone else. He did not bow to the vicar's wife. He did not greet the other ladies. He came straight to Vivienne and stopped in front of her, and Pell stepped back, and the whole room seemed to lean forward 1 careful inch. Miss Ashcombe, he said. Your Grace. I have come to announce, before these witnesses, that Miss Vivienne Ashcombe of this parish has done me the honor of accepting my hand in marriage. The wedding will be in the spring. The room did not breathe. Not one glass moved. One of the ladies, Vivienne did not see which, made a small sound that was almost a gasp and stopped it very quickly, and the room settled back into its silence like water after a stone. He turned then, slowly, and let his gaze move once only, around the room. He did not stop at any face. He did not need to. He turned back to Vivienne. He did not smile. He never smiled easily. But something in his eyes moved. Miss Ashcombe, he said. Yes, thank you. He said it quietly, and only she heard the exact tone, but the room saw the words. It saw the way he inclined his head to her. It saw the way he waited for her to give him her hand before he took it. It saw the way he did not lift her hand to his lips in a showy gesture, but only held it, briefly, in both of his, before he let it go. Then he bowed to Petra, a full bow, the kind reserved for great persons, and Petra curtsied back with her calm, pale eyes, and the Duke turned and walked out with Pell behind him carrying his hat. The room did not breathe until the door closed. Then the vicar's wife stood up so quickly she spilled her wine and began to say things about how delighted she was. And other women rushed forward with their hands out, and Vivienne stood in the middle of it, with Petra's arm hooked firmly through hers, and did not, this time, cry, but it was not yet done. That was the thing about a promise. A promise is only a promise until it is a fact. Vivienne knew this. Petra had taught her. The winter was long. The wedding was in the spring. Between the promise and the wedding there was a whole cold country to cross, and Lady Marisette had not been the only one with something to say. The letters began arriving before Christmas. Some were kind. Most were not. There were relations of the Duke, distant cousins, aunts twice removed, who had opinions about who ought to marry a duke and who ought not. There was a cousin in London who wrote a letter of such elegant cruelty that Petra threw it into the fire without letting Vivienne read past the first line. There was talk in drawing rooms Vivienne had never entered. Vivienne, at the Duke's request, spent the fortnight before Christmas at Ravenholm itself. Petra came with her. This was not, the Duke pointed out, negotiable. Vivienne was to see the house that would be her house. She was to meet the servants who would be her servants. She was to walk the gardens and stand in the great hall and understand what she was accepting, so that she would accept it with her eyes open. The house was terrifying. She admitted this to Petra on the first night. It was terrifying not because it was grand, but she had been prepared for that. It was terrifying because it was cold. There was no other word. Room after room of beautifully painted ceilings and marble mantelpieces and portraits of stern men who had all been dukes, and every room felt like a room in which no one had laughed in 50 years. The Duke saw her face at dinner the second night. He did not ask what was wrong. He said, when the plates had been cleared, "Would you like to see something?" Yes, he took her, with Petra at a discreet distance behind them, up a small staircase at the back of the house, along a corridor she had not been shown that morning, to a door at the end. He opened it. Inside was a small room with a fire lit. It was not grand at all. It had a low ceiling and a worn rug and a chair by the fire that had been sat in for a very long time. There were books on a table beside the chair. There was a rough drawing pinned above the mantel. The drawing had been done, unmistakably, by a small child. It showed 3 stick figures under a large sun. "This is my room," the Duke said. "The one I use. The other rooms are for other people. Not this one." Vivienne looked at the drawing. "Tomas gave it to me," the Duke said, "last month. He has begun to speak a little. He wanted me to have this. I did not want to hang it in a room where servants would tidy it." Petra, behind them, made a small sound. Vivienne did not turn to look at her. She looked at the drawing. She looked at the chair. She looked at the fire. "I can live in a house that has a room like this in it," she said, more to herself than to him. "That is what I hoped," he said. Christmas came. Christmas passed. In the 3rd week of January, a small item appeared in a London paper suggesting that the Duke of Ravenholm's forthcoming marriage to a Miss Ashcombe of no particular family was in some doubt, and that his Grace, upon reflection, was said by close friends to be reconsidering. The item was unsigned. It was, everyone agreed, the sort of item that could be planted by anyone with a shilling and a wish to see damage done. The Duke read the item at his breakfast table. He read it once. He set the paper down. He asked Pell to bring him his writing case, and he wrote 3 letters. He sent one to the paper. He sent one to his lawyer. He sent one to Vivienne. The letter to Vivienne was very short. It said, "Do not believe anything you read about us that is not written in my hand. I will be at the cottage on Friday. Yours, R." Vivienne read the letter twice. She folded it. She put it in the drawer where she kept her mother's earrings and the pressed marigold from the day of the announcement and the small piece of linen she had never told him she had kept. She did not answer the letter. She did not need to. He would be there on Friday. He came on Friday. He came alone, in the plain coat, on the dark bay. He came into the parlor with the winter clinging to his shoulders, and he stood in front of her, in front of Petra, and said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to say the true thing, not the kind thing. I will. Do you wish to stop? No. Are you afraid? Yes. Of the house. No. Of the people. They will not stop. Not all of them. Not for years. Some of them will hate you until they die, because they had daughters, and their daughters are not you. I know. I will not always be able to shield you. I will do everything I can. There will still be days when someone will hurt you, and I will not know until after. I know. Vivienne, it was the first time he had used her name without the miss in front of it. It landed in the room like a small clear bell. Yes, I am not asking you if you can bear it. I am asking you if you wish to. She looked at him. She looked at Petra, who was pretending very hard to be looking at her mending. She looked at the small parlor with its lavender smell and its chipped teacups and its garden beyond the window where the first snowdrops had come up in the frost that morning. I wish to, she said. He nodded once. He did not smile. He did not need to. Then we go on, he said. They went on. Spring came slowly, as spring did in that county. The elms began to green. The lanes began to dry. By the middle of March, the marigolds Vivienne had cut in the autumn had been gone for months, but new growth was in the beds. And Petra was out in the garden most afternoons with a small trowel and a large hat, and the wedding was 3 weeks away. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lady Marisette Vaughan sent a letter to Ravenholm. It was addressed to the Duke, not to Vivienne. It was 2 sentences long. It said, I shall not attend. I wish her every happiness. It is not a joke. The Duke read it, folded it, and put it in the same drawer as Vivienne's letters. He did not show it to her until years later. 1 week before the wedding, on a soft gray morning, Vivienne walked the lane where she had caught him. She walked it alone. Petra was at home. The Duke was at Ravenholm. She had told no one she was going. She had needed to be there, once before everything changed. She stood under the elms where the scaffold had been. The wall was finished now. The stones were clean. The lane was quiet. She looked up at the sky, which was the color of weak tea, exactly as it had been that first morning, and she thought about all the small choices that had brought her here. The vicar's wife, the shorter lane, the basket of pears, the sound of the wood groaning, the step forward instead of the step back. She thought about the man who had fallen. She thought about the man who had walked into the vicar's parlor and said thank you in a voice only she could hear. She thought about the boy Tomas and his slate and the words he is not sad when he is here. She thought about Petra, sitting by her window with her mending, keeping the world from her by being calm at it. She heard a horse in the lane behind her. She did not turn at once. She knew the sound. Miss Ashcombe. Your Grace, you are not supposed to be alone. No one told me the lanes were forbidden. They are not. He got down. He walked to her. He stood beside her under the elms. He looked up at the finished wall, and then at the place in the grass where he had once lain across her lap. I did not know, he said, if I could bear to see this place again. And can you? With you, yes. They stood there a little while. The wind moved in the elms. A wood pigeon called from the trees behind the wall. Somewhere far away, a dog was barking at something that was not a threat. I have been thinking, he said, about that day. So have I. I have been thinking that when you caught me, you could not have known who I was. You could not have been trying to please me. You could not have been trying to gain anything. You caught me because you were the sort of person who catches a falling man. Anyone would have. No, he said. That is not true. It is a kind thing to say. But it is not true. Most people, when a scaffold cracks over their heads, step back. They step back to save themselves. You stepped forward. That is a rare thing. It is a rare thing at any hour of any day, and it happened to be the thing you did at the hour when I fell. She did not answer. I have been thinking, he went on, that the reason I asked you your name in the grass was that I had already decided, in the second before I hit you, what I was going to do about you. I did not know it in words. I knew it in some other part of myself. I saw a stranger step into the path of a falling man, and I understood before I had time to think that a person like that was the person I had been waiting to find. That is what I wanted to say to you before we are married. I wanted to say it in the place where it happened. I did not want you to enter the church next week without knowing that." Vivienne closed her eyes. The elms moved. The pigeon called again. She felt the shape of the moment take up a large room inside her chest. "Your Grace," she said, when she could speak. "Yes, I have caught many things in my life. Bees for my aunt when they came into the kitchen. A cup once that a child had knocked from a table. A cat that fell from the wall. Never a man." She opened her eyes. She looked at him. "I do not know why I stepped forward that morning. I thought about it for a long time afterward. I have decided I do not need to know. It happened. You were here. That is enough." He looked at her a long time. He did what he almost never did in all the years she had known him and would know him after. He smiled. Not a great smile. A small one. A tired, honest, private one that only she saw in the empty lane under the elms on a soft gray morning a week before her wedding. "Come," he said. "I will walk you home. Your aunt will scold us both. She will scold you. She never scolds me. That," he said, "does not seem fair." It is not. They walked. The horse followed at the end of its reins. The lane bent past the millers, and past the field where in summer the beans would come up, and past the little bridge over the stream where in April the primroses opened. At the gate of the cottage, Petra was in the garden, on her knees among the daffodils, and she looked up at them and said, "You are late." "Yes," Vivienne said, "you are always late these days. Yes, come inside. Both of you. The tea is cold. I will make more." They went inside. The parlor smelled of lavender and of wood smoke and of the small fire in the grate. The chipped cups came out. The Duke of Ravenholm sat in the chair he had sat in the first day he had called, and Vivienne sat across from him, and Petra sat between them with her mending. Outside, a wood pigeon called, and a slow spring rain began to fall on the roof, and inside the small warm room, 3 people who had each been alone in their own way for a very long time drank tea together, and did not need to say very much, because the thing that had wanted saying had been said, out in the lane, under the elms, and now what remained was only the living of it. A week later, she walked down the aisle of a small stone church in a dress the color of cream, and Petra walked her, because there was no one else, and the church was full of people who had opinions and a smaller number who did not, and the Duke of Ravenholm stood at the front and did not take his eyes from her once, from the door to the altar, and when she reached him, he put out his hand, and she put hers into it. And the church went perfectly still in the way rooms go still when they know they have witnessed something true, and she caught him as she had caught him in the lane, and this time she did not let him go.